So my son got these a while back. This is a whole series of marbles, different sizes and colors. They are to represent our solar system. It's very cool. And then he would line them up. They have these little mounts that he would line them up like on his dresser of what our solar system looked like. Now I have them here right in this bag. And it got me thinking, wouldn't it be interesting if this entire time we think we're such a big deal and kind of at the center of all of it, and we looked at how it takes 100,000 years traveling at the speed of light to cover our galaxy. And we've now discovered that there's a galaxy that's 4 million light years across, okay? So never gonna cross it. And even ours is this minuscule compared to what is, and we looked at that a while ago. What if for God, here's the solar system, and it's just in his pocket? You ever thought about that? Does he just kind of exist? It's where did I put Earth and the sun? Oh, that's right. That's where I put it. It's always the front right pocket is Earth and the sun and everything. It makes you wonder, how much bigger? What is all this to scale? You don't know. We know that where we exist is so infinitely small just compared to what we know already exists. And what does that say about him? What does that mean? Is that a physical thing? I don't know. But it does say this, that God created things that he can interact with, and yet at the same time, he can operate outside of whenever he wants. And that's an incredible thing. It's one thing to just operate outside of it, kind of like human hands make a watch, and it's bound by space and by time, quite literally. And there's gears and there's stuff that's happening even in my watch that they don't know their purpose. They're just moving. And they're playing one tiny little role on what's happening. And when you get out in front of it, you see that there's this whole other thing that's happening. It's one thing to be outside of your watch. It's another thing to set the watch and then set it in such a way that you do everything that you do within the confines of the watch. And I may not be totally catching everybody in the room yet, but I think as we go on, you're going to see where I'm coming from. Here's what we're going to do today. Is we're going to look at the order of events of Matthew and Luke. Normally, you read Matthew if you do it all during Christmas time, or you read Luke. And we read it as kind of oh, that's sweet, it's nice. And then we march kids down the aisle, and we do a nativity. And we read Luke 2, or we had to memorize Luke 2 in school, and we didn't even know all the details of it. We just had a Christmas thing, and Hadley, for her school, was Mary. They dressed her up like Mary, and she had a baby that was the size of her as she's walking down the aisle. And as she passes us in real time, we have it on camera, she looks at us and says twice to the camera, "I'm Mary." Okay? And it was super cute. And it's super cute because then you can get all the kids involved. So you need somebody to be shepherds, right? You need shepherds. And maybe there's magi, and you need the magi to show up, and you need the angels. And so what happens over enough time is that we all think this all happened at the same time. Because you got to fit it in within the third and fourth verse of Silent Night. The whole story, right? So we all walk out of church going, "Oh, I feel great. I'm completely historically inaccurate, but who cares, right? I feel wonderful." Right? Until somebody who actually knows their stuff looks at you one day and says, "Quirinius wasn't governor of Syria." That's what it says in Luke 2. That doesn't even match history. Your whole mythological Harry Potter rabbit's foot thing that you have going on, it's not even legit or real. Matthew and Luke can't even agree. Matthew has stuff in his that Luke doesn't have, and Luke doesn't have stuff that Matthew doesn't have. What's up? If Herod died at 4 or 5 BC, how do you make that work with Luke chapter 3 where it says he's about 30 years of age? Your timeline's off. Sounds like your guy's got a problem. And then but my kid looks so cute. We crushed it all into 2 verses of a song. So what we're going to try to do to the very best of my ability for you today is if you were in the David series and then you walked with us into this Isaiah series, we're going to use the same map, and I'm going to attempt to take Matthew and Luke and put them together for you and give you a timeline this week. Because what God does is the planets and all of the stars and all the cool stuff that's up in the sky, it's a clock. It's dead on the money. And if you think that when God spoke through the Word, who is the Word that became flesh, we would know that person to be Jesus later in history. Spoke everything into being, and at that time, the clock started. Everything started moving the way that it was going to move. And can you imagine setting the clock as like a timer that's counting down 5,000 years or 3,000 years before the very day that you need the alarm to go off? Exactly where you need it to go off at the perfect moment. It's one thing to manipulate human history. It's another thing to enter into human history. It's a whole other thing to start the cosmic clock timer 3, 4, 5,000 years in advance and have everything click, because all of the human beings running around that are just the little gears don't realize that every little movement they're making is setting in order the series of events in which the cosmic alarm would go off, and there he would be in Bethlehem. It's nuts. It's crazy. It's hard to even imagine. And if you're completely lost on what I'm saying, check out last week. Hopefully then it'll make more sense to you. So we're going to put all this together. Now you have to understand, Matthew and Luke, they're not competing with each other. The Gospels don't compete. They complement each other. If any two of you told me a story about an experience you had, you never repeat the exact same person's words. How boring. One of you's adding color about this conversation, and one of you's adding insights about what this one thing, and then one of you seems to pick up random details, so you jump in with your thought on whatever. That's what's happening. Matthew and Luke, they have different people that they're writing to, different cultures and backgrounds. Some have a shared history, some have no clue. Some things to Matthew and Luke are important because of who they're talking to. But what's cool is you can put them together. So they're not in competition. So we're going to attempt to put that together. Let's put the first map up here, and I can kind of walk you through it. So the first part of Matthew 1, 18 to 25, and Luke 2, 1 to 5. Here's what's happening. There's this whole business where Mary and Joseph are betrothed, okay? That's engaged. That's different than how you're engaged, the way you think of engagement. We're like, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. We can always kill it, call the caterer, and blow it off, okay? That's not how this worked back then. If you're engaged, it's like next level of commitment culturally. There's no backing out. Not really. And this is why Joseph was going to try to divorce Mary quietly. It was going to ruin her life forever. She was going to be marked. Teenage girl, there's no chance in her future. So he's trying to figure it out, but then God intervenes. An angel comes to him, tells him, no, this is the real deal. This isn't a made-up story. She's not lying to you. She hasn't slept with somebody else. This is really a movement of God. This is what's happening, okay? Now, put it in 2023. How many people in her hometown do you think believe that? Not many, okay? Just like now. Just human behavior, right? So here it is. So they have to head south to Bethlehem. Now, Quirinius was governor of Syria. Just in case you know, whenever you read that, governor back, 2,000 years ago could mean literally the governor or the most powerful person in that position in that region at that time. Okay? So Quirinius historically was not governor, yet he was the top military commander, just so you know. So that's all language and how it all works together, okay? So they know that they got to head south. Some people will tell you historically, wait a minute, there was no tax during that year, right? There was no tax in 2 BC or 3 BC. It's to register to be taxed. You got to register. Good old IRS, right? Nothing's new. Same strategies. We want to know where you are, where you live, how much you got. Then we're going to drill you, right? So they're going to head to their hometown. Where's their hometown? Bethlehem. It's just a really short walk of 80 miles. Rome was ahead of the game in putting in roads, okay? But I don't know how much attention they probably gave this region. So this is tough sledding 2,000 years ago. And so they go 80 miles. They move down, they head down to Bethlehem where they got to register to be taxed, okay? And now once she's there, we see in Luke 2, okay? Here, check out this next one, okay? We see that Jesus he's born, okay? He's born in Bethlehem, as the prophecy would say. Very cool, okay? And within 8 days, Jesus has to be circumcised. He's staying still under the law. Jesus would even say as an adult, I haven't come to abolish the law, I've come to fulfill it. What was Levitical law? That he be circumcised within 8 days. So they got to truck it into Jerusalem, 6 miles away. Okay? Goes in, circumcises Jesus, come on back. 12 miles round trip. Okay? No Uber. Brutal. Okay? They're back in Bethlehem. Now, 40 days later, she has to complete all of her rites of purification and everything else that they have Levitical law of 40 days later. Then they can go back into the temple and then present Jesus. Okay? Jesus, the firstborn of all creation, right? So Jesus goes in, and that's when in Luke 2:22-38, there's just like some crazy conversations that happen. There's these people that have been waiting for years to finally meet the Messiah. And poor Mary, you can imagine how excited she was, and Joseph, how beaming they must have been. Look at this incredible, our son's at the center of human history. Oh, he's so cute, everything else. And you know, they can't even get like even just moments of pretending that their life is going to be normal. Because even in that moment, they're reminded, basically, your son is going to divide the world in half. And your son is going to break your heart. Not because he's going to go hit the party scene, okay, to the nth degree, but because people are going to love him and people are going to hate him. There'll be wars fought over indirectly and directly because of him. And ultimately, he's going to die for the very causes that otherwise would lead people to hell. So this is an interesting thing with Mary. She just never gets to pretend like any other parent. She doesn't get to dream what's going to happen. I wonder what my kid will be like when they're this age. I wonder what they're going to... She's constantly has to get hit, and it has to be brutal for her. Constantly checked or kind of hit with, well, this is the purpose of why he's here, right? So at this point, there they've made the round trip twice, 6 miles round trip. They've done that twice. And here's what Luke 2:39-40 says. When Joseph and Mary had done everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom and grace, and the grace of God was on him. So if all you ever do is read Luke 2, what Luke 2 just does is, okay, so after he did that, and they went home. That's it, right? And what's happening is really to Luke, that's what mattered. That's it. And they headed back to Nazareth. But Luke just kind of skips over a whole bunch of details in the story. And the Gospels will do that from sometimes. In Acts, you get the impression that Paul was knocked off of his horse, and he meets Jesus, and he immediately becomes a missionary. You read Galatians, and you find out, oh, there's like 3 years of Paul rethinking his entire life before he becomes a missionary, okay? So that's all right, but that's what happens in Luke 2. And then Matthew 1:25 would say this, but he did not consummate their marriage until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. So then Matthew kind of picks up with this idea that, okay, like she waited, he waited, and they consummated their marriage after the fact, okay? Now here's where Matthew picks up with this story, because what Matthew jumps in is, at the moment when they're doing the thing, after they went already after 40 days, and they already went to Jerusalem and came back to Bethlehem. 40 days has gone by, okay? I would say that this is now where the Matthew text picks up, okay? So now they did the 8-day circumcision, came back to Bethlehem, went back into town 40 days later, at the 40-day mark, okay? Then came back home to Bethlehem, and then at that point, I would say that this is when the Matthew details. So they didn't go right back. That's what I'm saying. They're here now. You with me? And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's about to happen that Luke skips over. And this is where this picks up when they're in Bethlehem after the 40-day purification. Check it out. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When the king heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So just stop for a second. This Magi coming from the east. Remember, we talked about all these groups that got pulled by Babylonian captivity. All these people that would be the descendants of God's people, they all got pulled east. So who has all the writings in their possession as a result of what are all the coming things that are going to happen, all the prophecies? The people in the east. And they're kind of like the science, astronomy, astrology kind of guys, okay? They're super smart. They pay close attention to the sky. At night in your life, what you would have done is, if you wanted some like kind of away from the city life and you wanted to be able to get a good night's rest, there's a chance that you would have climbed on your roof and slept on your roof. Away from the street, a little bit safer that way. You may not sleep necessarily on ground level with the street. And when you look up at night, there's nothing competing up in the sky. Not a lot of light. Certainly, no smog or whatever. There's nothing. No light pollution, no anything kind of pollution. So you notice every night if anything's changing in your world. It's the last thing you look at every single night, okay? What's interesting about this situation is something is going on that for some reason everyone in Jerusalem is missing it. There's things that are changing above them, and for some reason I think they just don't have the context of understanding. They don't know what they're looking at. Something's happening, but they can't figure it out. They can't piece together the dots until the Magi come in. And the Magi provide all the context of what they're seeing, okay? So it says, when King Herod heard this in verse 3, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. So see, now they're quoting the books, the ancient prophecies, because they have them, right? They replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. So what do we know about the star? It appeared. So it wasn't there, and then it was there. And maybe that's why he never caught it, because earlier it just wasn't there, and now it's there, right? So then he says in verse 8, he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I may go and worship him. That's not his intent. His intent is to kill Jesus. Verse 9, after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they have seen, when it rose, went ahead of them. Did you catch that? It stopped, and now it's moving again. Now they're on the go again. Cosmic GPS, okay? So the star stopped, and they were overjoyed, right? It stopped over the place where the child was. So it stopped, got going again, and then stopped. Now, could God have just moved something? Sure. What I'm going to show you in the next 2 weeks is that actually there's something that's happened that we already know has happened that's incredible about how actually a star would look like. It would stop, move, and stop again. Okay? Historically, scientifically proven. So cool. Verse 10, when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Okay, now, if you came 700 to 1,000 miles to see a prophecy fulfilled and to worship a baby, I get what we do with the little cute nativity scene. My question is to you, how much frankincense, myrrh, and gold would you bring? If he's worth traveling 700 to 1,000 miles to see, did you just flip him a coin? Good luck, Junior. Is that what you did? Probably not. So you got to think about, this is a whole entourage moving into town. Because if you got gold, you probably need to protect it. So it's probably not 3 people. Probably a whole bunch of people. And now they're all descending on Bethlehem. These are very expensive. Frankincense means he's a priest. That's why they gave him frankincense. Myrrh means he's a healer. And gold means he's a king. And they present him all 3. The question is, how much, right? We like our Jesus to be poor. We like our Jesus not to have anything. But he just got something. So the question is, how much of something did he get, right? So at this point, this is what happens now. Is that he's presented with the gold, he's presented as the myrrh, and he's presented with the frankincense. Now here, check out this next map. Now, before I even describe what you're looking at, I want to make one point for you to think about. Mary never gets validation. And maybe you can relate to that. See, I think everything in Jesus' story is meant to go down the way that it goes down so that human beings with the human condition can understand that their God understands them. An unwed teenage girl in a town that's now dropping judgment on Potiphar and have now decided that she's got the scarlet letter on her head, okay? Like, there are people in this room, if not watching us online, that knows what it means to have people ridicule and belittle you down to dust. And how interesting is it that if God could intervene into human history any way that he wanted, he chooses to do so in scandal. This is the way he interrupts human history. And where does it all happen? Is Nazareth. You notice we haven't gone back to Nazareth. Where does all the cool stuff happen? Bethlehem. She never gets the people who thought X, Y, and Z about her, never see the caravan come into town. Why? It's in Bethlehem. Never see the angels that say glory to God in the highest and on earth peace and goodwill toward men. Why? It's in Bethlehem. And Bethlehem, as we've talked about in previous weeks, isn't talking to Nazareth. You ever been labeled in a way in your life? You've ever been misused in a way? Or some part of your reputation was destroyed, and man, how bad you'd love to even that score, right? Or that person has done that thing, and you would love to drop that bomb on social media so fast. And you hold your tongue and you hold it all together. You know, it would say in the scriptures during this part, and Mary treasured all those things in her heart. Mary at some point had to understand, like, the world's going to think what the world's going to think. I have to trust that this is exactly the way the plan is supposed to go. I don't understand why the plan has to involve such broken pieces, but God has seen fit to do exactly that. See? So what that should tell you is no matter what you're going through this Christmas season, if I've hit any buttons in this room, that's literally your world or your past or your history, when you pray at night to the Savior of the world, check it out, He gets it. He understands you. And not just understands you, He lived it too. He gets it. It's very cool. So at this point, this is what happens in Matthew chapter 2, verses 13. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said. Take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you. But Herod is going searching for the child to kill him. Now, how interesting. Frankincense, gold, myrrh, very expensive stuff. And it just so happens that you got a bolt for Egypt, right? Which is roughly 40 miles away. And now you got something to help you navigate the next couple years of your life. God equips you for the moments that you need when you know them and when you need them. And that's exactly what He does in this moment. Now all of a sudden they've got some funds, because before that moment they're probably hurting. They have next to nothing to their name. They're not making a great living, great existence. And now they can take off to Egypt in safety, okay? And then check out this next map. This is very cool, out of Matthew chapter 2 and Luke 2:39 to 40. It says here that they trek another 140 miles all the way back to Nazareth. They avoid Bethlehem, and it suggests that they probably wanted to come back to Bethlehem. Why? Bethlehem is actually the historical lineage of Jesus. It's from Bethlehem. Nazareth, as we've talked about, what good comes from Nazareth? That's one of the future disciples would say that. Nazareth is in the north, as we've talked about in the past. Nazareth is where the 10 lost tribes existed. Nazareth is where the half-breed Samaritans were. And yet Jesus would be born in one of the most prestigious families or tribes, the tribe of Judah. But yet He would live amongst all the second-class citizens. Born with the best, lived with the rest. And this is why His ministry, He could go north and go south, and He'd just dig it. These are His people. He could cross all these lines at any given time, and the disciples would struggle in following Him. Why are we going here? Why are we diverting our journey this direction? Why are we dealing with these people? That's the way God saw fit. He gets it, the human condition. But then imagine this. This is why Jesus can do no real miracles of any significance in Nazareth. Why? A prophet is without honor in his hometown. But don't you see what happened? Look what happened in this whole, the whole map. You can put up the next map. By the time they're done traveling, their grand total probably 272, 300 miles in this whole story over a couple of years. Like I said, by the time they come back to Nazareth, it's just an older version of the same broken family. That's what they think up north. That's it. That's how they view them. And all I want to leave you with, it's one thing for God to be present everywhere. That's amazing. And it's another thing for God to know everything. But it's another thing as we look, especially in the next 2 weeks, especially, that God would order events so perfectly that he would work even within the structure that he created. He would work within the timetable that he put into motion in advance. And everything would land perfectly between what was happening in the sky. You realize if it's a few days one direction or the other, the whole thing with the star moving and stopping, it's all off. And there's possibility Jesus isn't even there anymore. It all has to happen. And all I want to leave you with before we close up and pray is just a simple thought that there isn't a single thing that's happened in your life, in your entire life, that's an accident. There isn't a single thing you've dealt with that has shocked you, that shocked God. You were the only person ever amazed. You were the only one who was ever caught off guard. You were the only one who was ever surprised. And that doesn't mean he rejoices in your pain. It doesn't mean he's good with your rejection. It doesn't mean he has no issue with the problems or whatever you're dealing with. What it means is in the exact same way that Mary and Joseph, in their mind, they're just living their life, trying not to get killed. That's all they're trying to do, and trying to do what the government told them. And little did they know, every place that they were going and when they were going there, they're just checking off prophecy after prophecy while matching everything else that's happening above them. Everything in your life, you're seated here today. I don't care if you haven't been here in a year, 3 years, 5 years. If you randomly clicked on our video right now and you're watching the feed for the first time ever, if you haven't been here in 6 months, whatever it is, none of it. You're seated here right now, where you're seated, exactly where you're seated, already known to God. Every detail matters to him about who you are and your value and your worth and why he knit you together. And every pain and hurt and scar, you have one choice. You can either let that define you for the rest of your life, or you can let Jesus define the rest of your life. And what that means is that everything that's ever happened, he paid for. It's not your defining characteristic. There's things that happen that he knew were going to happen. And they're meant to shape and mold us sometimes. Sometimes they're meant to break us before him. But all of it is meant to do the exact same thing that 2,000 years ago did. And that's to point to Jesus. That's the purpose. That's the reason for life. That's the reason that any of this matters. Jesus. Jesus. Amen? Amen. Let's pray.